I'm Dean Walker, and welcome to the Poetry of Predicament podcast, a podcast for people brave enough to face humanity's challenges and problems, and most importantly, our numerous predicaments. The Poetry of Predicament is a podcast meant to inspire us to bring forth grace, beauty, and connection with the web of life in the face of a predicament-laden world. In these times of universal collapse of Earth and human systems, it is impossible to avoid the experience of loss at virtually every level. Help us welcome Lily Myers Kaplan, who can help us transform that experience of loss into a sense of deeply meaningful legacy. Welcome to another episode of the Poetry of Predicament podcast. I'm your host, Dean Spillane Walker, and this is somewhere in the middle of May 2020. Yet another very long month in a string of months now that have been completely inundated in the coronavirus around the world. And all that seems to have done in terms of this body of work that I expressed through the Poetry of Predicament and livingresilience.net, the website, and Deep Academy, and so on, is it seems to have acquainted the vast majority of the privileged population of this planet with online video conferencing. And so virtually everything is going to that now. And it's also been a remarkable opportunity with some pockets of the population to dive deeper into topics, really want some more of our attention, but don't necessarily get it in the regular workaday world that we're used to. One of those topics that doesn't get nearly enough attention, in my judgment, is something that I would call a weak suit for our culture, the privileged cultures, and especially the United States. We have a difficult time engaging with certain topics, and this is not the right place to go into all the whys and wherefores of why we have those weak spots, why we have those things that we tend to avoid at all costs. But we do have the purpose today of diving deep into one of those topics that we just don't seem to do very well. And that is the whole area of death, dying, grief, and loss. Because we tend to reject or deny or suppress or avoid those topics so much, I think we are missing an extraordinary element, a core element of what it is to be a human being, for a topic that looks like it's just negative and full of pain and again, indeed, grief and those elements that we wish that we were immortal. What we miss by having those tendencies is we miss the richness, the depth, the richness, some would even say the soul of what it is to be alive. And what that means is, how do we learn to lean into this kind of experience? Lean into this absolutely unavoidable experience that we all will experience ourselves. And especially if we could lean into it as we look at the losses that we may be encountering now. This is a time of great, great loss, not just in the USA, obviously, around the world. There are many layers of loss present now. And so I'm I'm just very excited. I found great value in not only knowing Lily Myers Kaplan, but to to have experienced her work through reading her book, Lost to Legacy, and one of her workshops here in Southern Oregon, where she has been a presence in the personal development community here for years, and then in the Bay Area for years before that. And I just think that there's an opportunity to have Lily's work blossom in this time as as a way to kind of soften or ease the transition from rejecting or denying or suppressing these whole topics of grief, loss, death, and so on, and allowing a transition in ourselves to leaning into the experience of those precious and core human experiences. And Lily, I just think you've done such an artful job of bringing us a way to cross that bridge, or you've got some far more potent and clear analogies that you use to describe your work. So we're going to get into that. But first, Lily, thank you for sitting through this long introduction. I appreciate it. And I just really wanted to, in some way, give the folks who are viewing a chance to hear from me personally, from my experience, which I'm happy to offer up during our conversation today, how well you've done that. You've helped me to bridge from, I didn't even know I had pockets of reluctance or pockets of awkwardness, I think in my case. I didn't know how to explore this realm and have it be rich, have it be something that unfolds parts of myself. So that's the artfulness that I wanted to point to in your work. And so, Lily Myers Kaplan, thank you so much for coming on the Poetry of Predicament. And won't you tell us about this lovely, powerful body of work you've created?
Of course. Thank you, Dean. Thank you for those touching words about my work. I really, it goes right into my heart. And that you found the value that you just described. And, I just want to tell your listeners, first of all, that Lost to Legacy is a path of conscious mourning. It's a path of shifting our relationship to sorrow, in seeing that it's an opportunity for growth. And that's why I call it's a path of conscious mourning. Everybody mourns, everybody experiences death, everybody responds to death in different ways. We're undergoing a huge death in our culture right now, the death of so many freedoms, the death of normalcy, the loss of people, the loss of the ability to touch. There's so many losses that we're experiencing right now. And there's a lot of sorrow that comes with that. Or perhaps other people, everybody responds differently. That's the thing that I wanted to say. But in this Lost to Legacy path, the idea is to engage with our losses in a way that transforms them into a way of living, what I call a living legacy. That's why it's called Lost to Legacy. And before I dive into more detail, I want to read the first couple sentences of the book, because I think it speaks to exactly what this is about. And it says, "Dear readers, Imagine the possibility that your story of loss, grief, or sorrow could be rewritten until it becomes completely new, building on the old story as a foundation for everything yet to come. Imagine, as in the alchemy of the ancients, turning the lead of your sorrows into the gold of a legacy built from your renewed story of meaning and renovated life purpose. And this book is a guide to that possibility. So that's just a good place for us to start.
Well, good. Let's go there.
Okay. Well, let me start by showing everybody the cover of the book. And the reason I want to do that is because it really symbolically shows what I was just talking about. As you see in the cover, there is darkness and desolation, or maybe we think of that as the coldness of winter on the left, and the beauty and the resurgence of life on the right. Winter into spring is another way that I think of the image on this cover. And again, I want to read something from the book that speaks to what this is while you're looking at the picture. And it has to do with accepting that winter, that the stillness and the decline or the darkness of winter is a necessity on the path of growth. Once we embrace death as a part of life, we realize the preciousness of being alive. We open to the imperative to respect life in every form, ourselves, humanity, and nature. The natural world is whole. Unlike the human mind, it cannot reflect upon itself. It's unsplit and unconflicted. And in that way, nature, because it is whole, is a powerful teacher for us. When we connect with nature and the planetary earth body from which we humans are born, we're bridged to that wholeness. Since human beings are part of nature, made of the same essential matter as the earth, we're subject to the same cycles, including death, including winter. Admitting this helps us know that we're part of something larger than our brief human lives. And if you think about that, human life is so minuscule in comparison to the life of the planet. Admitting this, I'm going to read that line again. Admitting this helps us know that we're part of something larger than our brief human lives. And this knowledge invites us to accept loss as an intrinsic and necessary part of who we are. It prepares us for death and its accompanying sorrow.
Can I chime in here for a moment?
Yeah.
Yeah. I'm glad you read that again. And it really hit me, even though we both said it in different ways in this first few minutes of this talk. You reading that really framed this COVID time in particular in a way that's just extraordinarily important. And it's something that I have not been so artful in trying to express it to the folks that watch this podcast or partake in the online learning series and the coaching and so on that's available in this website and all that. What I've been seeing is that how we frame this time is of existential importance. And we have almost no shared tools with which to do that. We just aren't built, we haven't trained ourselves as a culture to look for the value in a time like this. as if it could be that precious and essential winter before anything can even think about spring. So, figurative spring. I think it's an extraordinary point, and I really appreciate, again, you reading that twice. It's, for me, that it's an extraordinarily powerful foundation for where we're going in this conversation and this work. So thanks.
Yeah. It's funny, I actually read a different piece than I read first. So it was different, but it bears repeating in different ways, right? So because our culture is trained, we're trained in Western culture mostly. Indigenous cultures are not shying away from death in the way that we are in Western civilization. There is no embalming. There is no trying to preserve. Perhaps in ancient civilizations, there was a preservation and a reverence that went with that for the body after death and in its burial, a reverence for that. And we have become a culture that shies away from that, that hides it, that it's become a taboo thing. And I learned this when my sister died, and I actually, my mom died 3 months before my sister, and my brother-in-law 9 months after my sister. So for that year, I was steeped in, and what I want to say, initiated by death and awakened to what was most important in the way that I lived, in the way that I thought, in the way that I acted, and the way that I wanted to share my story with the people in my life was very welcome for about 3 months, right? And then people get tired of it. And it's what I call now the statute of limitations on death talk. There's a statute of limitations on grief talk. There's only so long. And I remember the night my husband nudged me under the table because our friends were glazing over. And so this is why I took the work on that I did, because our culture is afraid of these things. And if you're afraid of death, you cannot fully initiate into life. And so what you're just talking about, as the COVID being a necessary time of winter preceding spring, I really see it as an initiation, should we choose to accept it. Initiation isn't a done deal. You really have to say yes to it. And it's what I call in the book, saying yes to death. A child does not grow into an adolescent without letting go and without the dying to the child. A maiden does not become a matron, let's say, a married woman, without letting her independence, a certain amount of her independence to die. And people might react to that because, yes, of course, in our modern culture, we can maintain a sense of our own autonomy and independence in a marriage. But nevertheless, there is something that dies in order for us to grow. And it's what I talk about as initiation. And I believe that we're initiating, and that COVID-19 in some ways, as hard and difficult and tragic as it is a gift. If we choose to embrace the death. And I believe that to be true of all loss and grief. And so it's a conscious relationship to death, a conscious relationship with the loss. It doesn't mean we aren't sad or sorrowful or angry or hurt or upset. It means we choose to engage with it, embrace it. And the tagline of my organization, Spirit of Resh Foundation, is embracing death, enhancing life by embracing death.
I I'd like to just tell a brief story about my experience of particularly the book version of your work and how your story about having people's eyes glaze over and not being particularly aware of the statute of limitations and so on. Um, you were very gracious in your invitation to have me read your book before you published it, and it was a joy to do that. And and I was excited to write a blurb for you. It's just, yeah, well, please. And I had no idea how much I had given up on fully expressing the body of work that I'm involved with, which the elevator pitch on that is I'm offering support and resources for people who are bravely facing human-caused collapse of Earth and human systems. So that's about as global and about as dismal a topic as I could have chosen. And I can't tell you how many people I've, caused that glazed over look in. It's far less personal and intimate than you were just describing with your own loss, but it's the same kind of glazed overness that I think we're both pointing at. And I've got to tell you, you just shocked me in the best possible way when you saw what I had written as a blurb for your book. And you mentioned, you didn't include anything about your work and how this lost legacy work impacted your work. And I realized I had sucked out the stuff that I am most committed to and that I had most engaged with when I read your book, because I had become so avoidant, so phobic of that glazed over look in people. And I just had to assume that the last thing you wanted in a blurb for your book was some guy talking about global scale loss. And you came back to me and said, hey, I know, put in the good stuff. Put in the stuff that matters most to you. And at that scale, why not? So I guess I'm sharing this to share my own appreciation for you kind of cracking that stuff off of me and at that point, but also how incredibly useful for me this work is for extraordinarily global scale that I'm on most of the time, but also on the deeply intimate scale, which for me was the suicide of my brother and the loss that came from that and the process that I had in that. And both were easily held in the container of your work.
Thank you. I knew that would be true about you. And that's why I asked you to write
Yeah,
the book.
yeah.
And the book is actually titled Lost to Legacy, A Stepping Stone Path to Healing and Transformation. And so I want to say a little bit more about the context of the book in a minute, but I want to say that in the stepping stones, which are a workbook, which is about 2/3 of the book, along with many different kinds of practices. And again, we'll get into the detail on that. But in every single stepping stone and in every single ceremony or practice or exercise that I'm offering, I suggest that people use these steps, these step-by-step path for engaging with any kind of loss. Any kind of loss. In particular, I wanted to, and I'm going to look it up and tell you exactly the phrase I used, but I think I said something like, or planetary or cultural changes. Again, I wanted to keep it pretty open, but it's what I said earlier. There's so many different ways that we experience loss. And one person who has so kindly contacted me shared that she's working the stepping stones around what she didn't get as a child. Even though her mom just recently died, she bought the book. She may be thinking she was going to work on her grief around her mother's death, but it really opened up a new way of thinking about her own psyche. And it was important to me in writing the book that it be broad. And most of the stories in the book tell stories of someone who has had somebody they love die and how they transformed that loss into something new and vital in their life. But it was important to me to include the planet, deeply important to me to include our relationship with the planet in the book. And even one of the people who edited it suggested, this is really about people who have died. You might want to take those phrases out. And I could not. And every loss begins long before the actual loss. It starts with what I think, it starts with love. We have an experience of something, an idea, a thing, a person that we love. I love being in nature. It is the most healing and satisfying way of engaging with the world that I know in my heart. And so if I were working these lost to legacy stepping stone path, this path, I would start with when I fell in love. When I fell in love with the earth. I might start with the first time I saw the Milky Way, and it blew my mind. And if I were to break up my path of loss with the earth, one of the stepping stones is to break up our story into chapters. So that, because if I try to engage with how I feel about what's going on the planet, it's so big, I can't chew that bite. I can't even get it in my mouth. So it's easier to just put it to the side. But if I break it down, and I have the first chapter is the Milky Way, and somewhere in there is a chapter called Earth Day 1971, because I remember the first Earth Day. I got a bike to ride to school for that experience. And another might be, some film I saw where I saw a picture of a fish trapped in a plastic, bag. I would have to break it down, and then each chapter tells me something about me and it.
Right.
And ultimately, these stepping stones take us through this path, through each chapter tells us something, and it leads somewhere by the end to what's important to me, and what will I choose, how will I choose to live, and who will I choose to be, and how will I choose to make a difference. What's my vision? And I'm not single-handedly going to heal the planet. None of us are.
Right.
And so that's not the story here. But the story is, what actions and choices do I make? And that becomes my living legacy. And that has meaning, and there's purpose in it, and all of that is healing. It may not fix the thing, but it's healing for me, and then I become a force, an agent for positive growth and change.
Yeah, it's brilliant. I'm just getting at a whole new level. We've had a number of conversations, you and I, over the past few months and so on, but really now there's a way that this is crystallizing, and a remarkable way that your writing, this process, this lost to legacy process, and the stepping stones and so on, is such a remarkable fit with many of the other thought leaders that I get a chance to speak with on this podcast. One that comes to mind is a guy named Jonathan Franzen, who had a very controversial article that he put out last September. And all the controversy aside, I handle that in my other podcast with him. But the essence that I was so inspired by from his writing was, he called the offering, "What if we stop pretending that things are going to be okay, that things are not going to be okay?" And I said, I'll stop trying to remember poorly what his title was. In essence, what he was asking is, what if we stop pretending that we're not in collapse right now? And I love what you just said about, this work may not come close to fixing this scale of what's going on the planet. There might not be any fixing of what's going on the planet if we tell the truth about it. And that's what he was suggesting, is what if we stopped pretending that everything is going to be okay and everything is going to get fixed and so on. And he then suggested exactly what you were just laying out for us. Find what you love and bring yourself to that in whatever your way is, if that's activism, if that's writing, if that's personal exploration, other kinds of creativity. A remarkable blend between yourself and what I thought was a pretty decent orientation for us as just human beings, from Jonathan Franzen a few months ago. So thanks.
Mm-hmm. When you were just talking, I was reminded, it's not about the book at all, but I was reminding of a guy named Day Shilkret. I don't know if I'm saying his last name properly. And his work is called Morning Altars. He goes out every morning into nature and he creates an altar or a mandala with objects that he finds in the natural world. It's stunning. And, in response to that daunting truth or reality or premise, let's say, that it's irreversible what's happening on the planet. We're not having that conversation right now, but let's just say it's a premise, it's a theory. Maybe that creating beauty in the world is a response in the face of extinction.
Yes. Yes.
I had a experience of a meditation, or kind of a visceral vision kind of experience, after all these people in my life had died and I was walking in the world, in between worlds, in a sense. I was sort of feeling very connected to the other side and disembodied side, what I called incarnation and disincarnation. And I heard my great aunt speaking to me, and with that inner voice. It was really my own inner voice. And I was in this big question: what is mine to do? When all these people in my life died, so did I. A part of me, a sense of what was I doing in the world? Who was I supposed to be? I couldn't do what I had been doing anymore. Everything went underground in that way that winter has us go underground. And in that stillness and in that quiet, I heard her voice telling me that helping people to fall in love with the earth through beauty was enough. That was enough. And I was so relieved, because activism is not my way.
Right.
I'm a 1 or 2 or 10 people at a time kind of gal.
Mm-hmm.
And so that we can go deep and that we can go wide and that we can connect with ourselves and each other and the earth. She said, creating beauty on the earth, not even creating beauty on the earth, although I do that with my garden, but helping people fall in love with that, that's enough. And I know I'm just repeating myself, but it was such a big revelation. So this man, Day, who goes out and makes these incredible mandalas. I mean, I don't know his website, I can't tell you, but I invite everyone to go there. They're mind-blowingly beautiful. And it says, this is our planet. This is what we love. And he believes that by walking in beauty, he's making a difference. So we all have our way, just like we all have our way to respond to death. We all have our way of responding to loss. And this path says, you can do it your way. And here's a path that will help you do it your way. It doesn't tell you what to feel. It just creates this incredible container so that you can know more fully what you feel, what you believe, what you value. And maybe this is a good time to talk about those stepping stones,
Yeah,
because
I was thinking the
myself
exact
went
same
into
thing.
it.
I'd love to have you lay out some of the framework that
Yeah.
that makes up Lost to Legacy. That'd be great.
So the book is divided, or the workbook is divided into what I call standing stones. And these standing stones are really the backbone, the foundation of the workbook. They are story, reflection, vision, and action. And the story is important because not only do we break the story down as I was describing earlier, but story helps us to know that we're not alone. In the book, there are a lot of stories of other people who have transformed their own losses into a living expression of their values and what's important to them. But by telling the story in the way that we do it in this process, we're activating the right brain as well as the left brain. Let me show you this. When we're telling our story, we're doing it in a number of different ways. As I said earlier, we're breaking it into chapters. That's the left brain. We're they're bringing the left brain involved in thinking it through, breaking it down, dividing it up. And there are worksheets and journaling processes for doing that. At the same time, I'm asking people and inviting them to engage with their story in a right brain sort of way. And that is through practices in nature, by building altars or making slideshows or doing creative projects, and by engaging in a meditative contemplation practice. So like this slide shows, we're bridging both the conscious and the unconscious, or the right brain and the left brain, by engaging with story. In our reflection part of the workbook, people are being asked to think about what they learned. Breaking down each story into chapters gives you an opportunity to think about the experience of each chapter. What did you learn? What has meaning that maybe didn't have meaning before? And then in the vision section, we're looking at, well, if this is what has meaning, this is what I now realize I value, what do I envision for myself? What do I envision for my family? What do I hope for my community? And then the action steps are about translating all of that into a way of being and a way of living and actions. What am I going to do? That
Is that what you're calling the stepping stones?
Well, the standing stones are these four pieces. The
Yes.
stepping stones, there are two stepping stones within each of these four standing stones. So I guess maybe I didn't explain that really clearly, but each of these four standing stones is connected by two stepping stones, and that's the actual workbook, and it has all these practices in it. So ask me any questions that would clarify what I just said that might make that a little more understandable for people.
I think I'm getting pretty clear on the standing stones, the kind of the pillars that make up the container that holds the whole process. And then the stepping stones seem to be emergent action or emergent movement within one of those standing stones. And so it seems like that's where, well, it doesn't seem like it. I know that that's where I started to find value. Was you were laying out a potential direction that I could fill in with the elements of my own life in a particular direction, particularly like the example. I can't wait to check out this website about the morning altars. So that person's expression as they brought forth their own grief, their own loss, and started to use that as a fuel, as a motivator for their own creativity. That seems like the dynamic that you're pointing to in Lost to Legacy is within this, these pillars of, allowing us to focus our attention. There are these kind of emergent expressions that within each one that tend to come up. It seems like that's what you're sharing with us, is your experience of having tracked that quite a bit in your own life and with others. And that's the kind of just supportive structure or supportive direction that allows each person to fill in the elements of their life, the elements that they're grappling with, and take that in a possible direction, rather than the kind of floundering that seems to happen by default when we don't have that kind of container or that kind of gentle suggestion of direction. Is that fair to say?
That's great, and thanks for helping me to give that context a little bit more. I wanted to talk about the four standing stones first, because that's the arc. First, we have to connect with our own story. We have to really understand what we've lived, what we are living. It's not linear. People sort of think there's a step-by-step process. This is not a step-by-step process for grief that's you go from A to B to B to C. It leaves room for the chaotic, ever-changing responses that we have. So that's through our story. And then as we write our story, as we express the story through creative process, through slideshows, through altars. These were the things that helped me to express my story. When the statute of limitations ran out and I couldn't talk about it anymore, I told my story in all these other ways. Collages, art, clay, all kinds of ways that we can share our story with ourselves. Yeah. As we know that more, that we start to reflect, well, wait a minute. What is it about this statute of limitations? Why is it like that in our culture? I would like that to be different for other people. So I went from story to leading me into this reflective process. And then I started to have this vision. And then I took action. I started a nonprofit. I wrote a book. I wrote another book. All of those things became expressions of my story. So it's really important. I wanted people to see the arc. Now, within the arc, story, reflection, vision, and action, there are these stepping stones that break it down and break it down and break it down. There are worksheets So you could just go through and do there are 8 stepping stones. There's 2 within each of these 4 standing stones.
Mhm.
You could just do the worksheets. But then in support of those worksheets, there are nature practices, contemplation practices, creative practices, and journaling. And it's broken down so that you have this container for exploring all the different twists and turns of your path. I can show you these images that will help to break down what each of these stepping stones do. In the story stepping stones, you're really just breaking your story down. And as I said earlier, you're giving each one a title that's a phrase that's meaningful to you, like the Milky Way, as I said earlier, or Earth Day 1971. And then the stepping stone 2 would have you expand that story by describing that experience more fully. Earth Day 1971, buying a bike, riding up the hill, caring about the earth. So just phrases. And then there are journaling exercises that take you more deeply in, and questions and prompts that would help you to understand your story more, that would help to flesh it out, that would help to lead you into the next 2 stepping stones that are within this reflection process. And I say, what lies beneath? You turn over the stone. What else is there? What did you learn? Maybe on Earth Day 1971 and then Earth Day 1981 and 1991, for example. What have I learned about the planet? What have I learned about my relationship to the earth? What have I learned about things? And then making meaning of that. Well, if I've learned something, what does that mean to me? It means I care about something. I care about caring for the earth. I care about making beauty. I value helping people fall in love with the earth so they too will take care of her. So these would be the reflection stepping stones. And then that leads into, well, what's the vision? And as I've been expressing, it started to make, what are the possibilities? Now, in my relationship with death, the possibility was, what if people saw it as a sacred path? What if people really understood that engaging with death gives them a possibility of initiating into something more potent, more meaningful, more important? And I started to envision a world where we weren't afraid of loss and we weren't afraid of death, and we could talk about it, and there was no statute of limitations. And this is part of building purpose. It's what I started to wish for. So the vision stepping stones are helping you identify through each of these chapters, what did you learn, what's important to you, and then at the very end, the last 2 stepping stones are about action, practicing actions that express the wisdom that you gained through that loss. Through the loss of my family, and particularly my sister, I learned that all the crap that we expressed in our sisterhood, the ups and the downs, and the downs in particular, none of it mattered when it came to the fact that she was leaving this planet. And that the fact that we loved each other mattered so much more. I became such a more compassionate person. And so I started choosing to express that compassion and that kindness more. That became one of my most valued attributes. And to learn how to initiate myself into a kinder, gentler human being. And it took a lot of practice to do that. And then the final stepping stone is to create this legacy mission statement, to make a commitment to myself to make a commitment through this statement. This is how I'm going to live going forward, and to have something to be the rudder for transforming that death, that loss, that sorrow into something purposeful and meaningful, and to hold to that.
Yeah. Wow. You know, I've had a not so hidden agenda for sure the past couple of months, but really long before the COVID-19 pause came about. Well, early in 2019, I made a rigorous commitment to bringing what I keep calling advanced practices to the folks who are engaged with this work, either through the podcast or the other stuff we do. And these advanced practices are exactly like what you've been describing, Lily. The kind of practices that could take us from kind of and I mean really no harsh judgment here. I do plenty of my own Netflix watching and other kinds of frivolous, kind of who
Sure.
cares kind of ways of filling my time during this pause. But truthfully, not much, because I've come to really deeply appreciate these advanced practices that take us from just the survival level of self-regulation and co-regulation, the survival level of how can we sort of endure this time, because for many of us this is a devastating financial time, or this is a time of devastating loss if we're engaged with the actual virus itself, and not to mention the economic slam from which we may never recover, and so on. These advanced practices, as far as I know, and this is just me working with what I know from my own life experience and what I can see, is that if we aren't using this time to build our capacity, to expand our capacity to be present in the face of larger and larger stressors, then chances are we will suffer greatly. Even if we are lucky enough, privileged enough to have things going fairly well for us, I think the suffering quotient will be ever greater if people aren't doing the kind of inner work that expands our capacity. And I'm just boldly, just hearing you lay out this remarkable, simple, but potent structure of the stepping stones within this loss to legacy process that you've laid out. I myself have seen that expansion of capacity, particularly in the areas of grief, loss, confronting my own death, the death of others, and really the capacity to process and even hold pain, and to hold space for others who are going through these pieces. This is an advanced practice that's really just gelled for me at the strongest level yet in hearing you lay it out today. I've known it for a while, but really it's just come to full obvious expression for me today, and I'm grateful for that. I'm grateful for the timing of this conversation. And what I'm really just hoping for is that the folks who are watching this video can understand, really just go get this book, go do this process. If these are the kind of elements that are current for you in your process, in what you're facing in your life, what you're experiencing emerging during this pause time, then engage in these processes. And if this isn't the particular flavor of work that you're needing or wanting, or that is emerging for you in this time, then find what is, and find the advanced practices that meet that that need for you. Get engaged. There's only so much Netflix binge watching that's going to serve that part of us that just wants to check out. And then it'll be time to dive in, expand capacities. So I'm really appreciating that clarity, that seeing of this as an advanced practice that has just dawned on me at this level today. Yay. Thank you for that layout. Whatever it was about this time, it really became vivid for me.
Thank you. I mean, it really is an arc, and I want to say to people who are thinking about this, I had one woman who was going to put on an event for me, and I sent her the book, and she looked at it, and her response to me was, "It looks like a lot of work." And I said, "Yeah, it is a lot of work. Life is a lot of work. Growth, real lasting growth, is a lot of work, and it's not for everyone."
Yeah.
And so I ended up not having that event happen with her. That was fine, because this is a book, this is a path that for people who really want to be awake to themselves, awake to their story, awake to what's happening in the world. And, there's no hurry. You don't have to work this book in a week. You could read the book easily in a week. Less, much less. But you can't really work the depth of it quickly. And you don't have to do all of it. I always say to people, and I say it right in the book, you can pick and choose what speaks to you. Not all these practices will speak to every person. And that's why, in some ways, there are so many, because some people will resonate with one more than another. The ones that take you out on what I call a dream walk in nature, where we're asking for wisdom from the whole natural world, the wholeness of the natural world, that guide us on our own inner path, might really speak to some people. But others, getting into a park is the best nature experience they're going to have. They might really like the sitting still in contemplation.
Yeah.
Somebody else loves to write and journal. Somebody else, no, words are not their gate. So there's lots of different ways to do what you're calling these advanced practices, and there's as much time as you need. And sometimes I think for people, they get the map. They get the whole arc, the whole map, the story, reflection, vision, and action, and they go for a walk, and that's enough for them. Or they just do the worksheets. So there's lots of ways to get the value of this conscious relationship to death and loss that the book is suggesting, and the awakening to what it is to consciously choose the living legacy that we want to be walking with for the rest of our lives, however short or long that may be. Whether we're looking at the realities of this moment in time, this pandemic, this, what looks to me like no return to normal anytime, not just anytime soon, but ever, which I think is the good news, that we create our new world from this experience.
Yeah.
And we choose it, just like we choose what it is, our legacy. And I'll tell you a brief story about how the word legacy came to be so important to me. When my sister was dying, it was probably 2 or 3 in the morning, and her husband Dave and I were sitting with her. And Dave started saying to her, what do you want your memorial to be like? How shall we celebrate your life? And she was very quiet. She didn't really know. And I said, well, Lo, your memorial is about your legacy. And she said, what is my legacy? And we started naming all these things that we thought were beautiful and wonderful about her life and the various things that she had done as an environmental educator, as a potter, as a working with kids, all the things she had done. And she just was just lying there like, yeah, yeah. And finally I said, well, Lo, you really taught us all about love being the most important thing. Through these 14 years of brain cancer, you kept saying love is all that matters. And you initiated so many of us into love. And she just got very clear. She was like, I want my girlfriends to create my memorial. That's what she said. And I started to understand in that moment and in my reflective time through my story after she died that legacy wasn't about what we do. It isn't what we leave behind in terms of work or material things. In the final moments, what people think about is, did they love well and were they loved? And so I like to think of legacy as a living legacy. It's about who we are, how we be, and yes, partly what we do, but it's about the way we live.
Yeah.
That's what legacy is. And to bring it back to the moment, that's where I started on that big piece, that story, is that we're being shown that we have to make some different kinds of choices. This death, these losses, this tragedy, these traumas, we can choose to be a victim to them, or we can choose to be initiated by them.
Yeah.
As I said, initiation is not easy. And in the indigenous world, those initiation rites were intense, right? And this is intense. And so we choose to say, yes, I will let myself be initiated by this pandemic, by this financial crisis, by this lack of a normalcy, and I will choose what comes next.
Mm.
With all the horror, because within that, there's also great beauty.
Yeah. I couldn't have said it any better myself. That is about as clear a layout of the benefits of being willing to do that hard work that you described a few minutes ago. It's perhaps you have the same kind of difficulty speaking to folks as I do, where it's very clear to them that this is going to be tough. These are topics that don't show much in the way of benefits. Like, why would I want to talk about death? Why would I want to talk about loss? Why would I want to approach and feel any of the pain that's in my heart? And what kept coming to me when you were speaking these last few minutes in particular was the extraordinary love and beauty and generosity of spirit and roaring laughter and floods of tears and just the richness, and from the darkest depths of soul to the most brilliant light of the sharing of just basic human love with one another. All those things are so available. And unfortunately, our culture has painted a kind of an opacity, made it hard to see that that's really where the inspiration is. That's really where that more beautiful world our hearts know is possible. It's in there.
Mhm.
And it takes work to get in there and see it and be in it. It takes work. And Lily Myers Kaplan, uh, I'm thrilled that we did this conversation today. I've seen whole new dimensions. I've learned even more than I got from reading the book myself and being in a workshop with you. I think this was a really good conversation today on so many levels. Um, is there anything you'd like to say to finish up our time together?
There is. Well, first of all, I just want to let people know how they can contact me if they're interested through my organization's website, and that's reshfoundation.org. That's R-E-S as in Sam, H, foundation spelled all the way out. And I also want to let people know that during this time of the COVID, we're having what I'm not calling it a COVID special, although other people have. The book is normally $22 and you can buy it on Amazon.com or Better World Books, but we're offering it for $18 right now. It's about the least, the bottom that I can do with the, covering the shipping and handling and all of that. But you can get it directly from us for that discounted price during this time. But I really do want to end with this last piece from the book. And it really says what I believe is the possibility that could happen by allowing ourselves to be initiated by death. When the reality of life's impermanence sinks in, life's stunning beauty in all forms and iterations becomes transparent. Once the certainty of death breaks through denial, there's no person or life form that deserves anything less than respect, love, and honor. Wouldn't that mean that our oceans would be vitally alive instead of dying? Wouldn't diversity be welcome everywhere and all people finally, truly be treated equally? I believe it would. This is how death and grief are great equalizers, leveling the playing field as they illuminate the magnificence of all living beings. Once that consciousness infiltrates society, I believe that communities and the individuals within them will care for one another along the whole spectrum of life, death, grief, and rebirth. Compassion will replace competition, and people will know how to be fearlessly present with one another through all the challenges of life, including aging, illness, death, and grief, and certainly this pandemic. Thank you so much for listening, and thank you, Dean, for having me. I'm really delighted and grateful to be able to share my work and this interesting conversation with you.
Yeah. Thank you, Lily. It's really been very moving and enlarging experience for me. I feel so expanded by our conversation. Thanks for your work. Thanks for your friendship. And I look forward to seeing you the next time.
Yeah, thanks.
Thanks for watching another episode of the Poetry of Predicament podcast, produced by Dean Walker and the Living Resilience Alliance, www.livingresilience.net. Music today from Michael Hedges, as always, and also Port Blue Into the Sea. Also available on our website, www.livingresilience.net, is a wide array of articles, online learning series, arranging group and individual resilience coaching, and sign up for our every other Tuesday free support group that we call Safe Circle Calls.